I am delighted, Professor Snow, to attend today's Global Solutions Summit, the G20 Global Solutions Summit. The fact that you speak of solutions shows that you show a certain degree of optimism, and indeed we do need this if we want to master, rather tackle and then master the global challenges of our times. That global issues can actually only be solved with a global approach. Well, of that we are firmly, I personally am firmly convinced. This conviction, however, as we can see, isn't shared by each and everyone. Beyond any doubt, the very important multilateral approach is under pressure, even in crisis right now. It is attacked by protectionist, by isolationist thinking. It is actually under attack and is challenged, to put it mildly. Formats such as the G20, that the representatives of the strongest global industrialized nations, a format that brings the strongest economic nations of the world together, is all the more important for that, because it brings actually citizens of the world together, shaping an interconnected world. This motto of the G20 presidency of last year clearly brought home to us that global cooperation is something that we wish to bring forward with this and during our G20 presidency. And I think against all odds, in a number of areas, I may safely say we have actually been successful. We have, for example, been able to achieve progress in global health and global cooperation in that particular area. We've been able to be more successful in forging a partnership with Africa. We have championed a rules-based trade system with open markets. We also achieved progress in the global steel forum against excess steel capacities, and also we underscored our commitment to the objectives of Agenda 2030 and sustainable development. And I would like to here single out my colleague, the Federal Minister of the Environment. We also discussed the climate change. We were not able to come to an agreement, but with the exception of the United States of America, all of the other G20 partners are resolved to implement the Paris Climate Agreement. The German G20 presidency thought it was very important to have as broad-based a dialogue with representatives of all different walks of life of the civil society. And this is how we were able to look at individual issues from different vantage points. So against this background, such a think tank as G20 is obviously of very great importance for the political debate and the political discourse. Expert knowledge, experience of many smart minds is brought together here, and that is indeed something that enriches us in the process of finding and shaping a political opinion and solution. Thank you very much, Professor Snow, for this input. You, Professor Snow, are always very clearly telling us that this should not be any old exchange, but that this is about shaping the world of the future, about taking risks, taking also decisions, well, in a nutshell, global governments. Using the opportunities of globalization, at the same time mitigating the risks. Obviously, we would be very well put and equipped to do this together. But again, multilateral approaches are questioned. International institutions, international agreements are weakened. Solutions that have already been found are no longer supported. A policy of going alone is all of a sudden adopted, which is very worrying, because let us not forget the multilateral order, after all, was established as a very important lesson from the two devastating world wars of the past century. The idea behind this was that a very close network of international cooperation was to secure the peace. How easy, however, it is to lose the peace, how difficult it is to regain it. This is what we Europeans right now feel in our immediate neighborhood, on our doorstep indeed, in Ukraine, Syria or Libya. Millions of people were robbed of their future, particularly in Syria, and saw themselves forced to flee their home country. And this is how we here in Europe were confronted with this. Obviously, we hadn't bargained for this, but we immediately felt the consequences of crises and conflicts. All over the world, currently there are 65 million people who have fled their homes, more than at any other point in time ever since the Second World War. So is the multilateral approach that we had adopted up to now a dead end? Because, well, coordination agreement takes too long, because when we come to an agreement, it is always and invariably only on the basis of the lowest common denominator, or because multilateral institutions seem to be incapable of taking resolute action and achieve results, and indeed lack the political clout. The climate agreement of Paris and Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, however, are very prominent examples that underscore that the international community is capable of taking far-reaching decisions. But obviously this agreement and others need to be implemented. To this end, the United Nations need to its structures and institutions need to be brought more in line with the global sustainability objectives. And this is why UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is working very vigorously on trying to inject more efficiency, better coordination in the UN system, and Germany stands ready to resolutely support the Secretary-General in this endeavor. But the requirement to bring about reform is not only there in the institutions, be it the UNHCR, be it the World Food Programme. The capability of international organizations to take action also suffers due to a lack of political support and obviously as a consequence lack of funding. Just one example, for a very long time, or a fairly long time, there was much less support given to the refugee camps in Jordan and Lebanon than had been promised and had been pledged for the Syrian refugees. And this was one of the reasons why many people then set out for Europe in order to survive. This should come as no surprise to anyone. But despite all the flaws and the deficits, the United Nations remain of crucial importance as regards the removal of and tackling of the root causes of flight, be it about humanitarian support for those in need or in stabilizing areas of crisis. Without the United Nations and its agencies, the world would be a much less safe place. The number of refugees would be even higher, the breeding grounds of terror far more numerous. The financial, material and personnel support of the United Nations is indeed an investment in the future of untold numbers of people. And we also have to remind ourselves that individual countries, no matter how big and strong they may be, on their own will not be able to master the global challenges of our day. Genuine solutions need international solidarity. I could actually also obviously give you a lot of examples that multilateral approaches can be sometimes very tiring, very arduous. It is not promising simple solutions, and it's also not really suited for whipping up public opinion and catching votes. But there is nothing better than this multilateral approach in order to see to it that the shaping of globalization is not left to players who exclusively act from their own vested interests and not having the common weal in mind. We see that there is a necessity for a balance of interests, and that means common structures are more and more gaining in importance. The European or the African Union, NATO, the international organizations such as WTO, IMF, World Bank or ILO, and first and foremost, obviously, the United Nations. Germany is a candidate for a non-permanent seat in the Security Council for the period of time 2019 to 2020. We've done this because we want to show that we feel committed to an international order, and we also wanted to show that we're ready to shoulder international responsibility. This is why we are seeking, together with other partners, a political solution for Syria, and why we are determined to stand by the Iran agreement, provided, obviously, that Iran too fulfills its commitments. This is why we are also shouldering responsibility together with others for security and stability in African countries. This obviously can only ever be help for self-help, because Africa itself has to become empowered to take over crisis resolution and conflict solution. Peace is the most important precondition for a life in dignity, for no one being forced to flee and for no one having to resort to illegal migration, which after all only is to the benefit of traffickers. Africa is a young continent. Its population is growing very rapidly. More than half of the population in Africa is younger than 25 years of age. It's quite interesting when I ask, what's the average age here in Germany? Then, well, it's about 45. Average age in Niger and Mali, it's 15 years, believe it or not. So that very clearly demonstrates the difference between our countries. So young people in Africa need perspectives for the future. They need more investments in education, in vocational training, in employment. And I'm delighted to know that the Africans themselves, with their Agenda 2063, have outlined their own plan of action, and because that makes it easier for us to cooperate with them. These opening up of perspectives is also necessary for, first and foremost, for women in Africa, so that they may be better equipped to participate in the business life and the economic life of their countries. A sustainable economic development includes each and everyone. It rests on and depends on solid framework conditions, on a functioning basic infrastructure, and on good governance. And under these conditions, once they are in place, private investors will become interested. Without them, we will not be able to be successful. Just by giving ODA, no sustainable economic growth can be generated. And this is why we launched an initiative during our G20 presidency, the so-called Compact with Africa initiative, because we wanted to enlist the support of private business. And also, we use this forum to discuss with the African governments to provide for the necessary conditions to make this possible. We include also multilateral players such as the IMF, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, in order to tap this potential to mobilize investments. It's very important, obviously, first and foremost, to support the regional integration of markets. We want to make it possible, therefore, to have through this to have a technology and knowledge transfer, which can then give a boost to the economic development as a whole, and it can then also obviously enhance the profile of Africa in the global markets. We all know that integration into the global economy is of the essence. We in Germany know that to a very large degree our prosperity we owe to the successful integration in global markets. So because of this experience, we are convinced that open markets, multilateral rules-based trade systems are important, with the World Trade Organization at the center. A multilateral set of rules creates legal certainty, more predictability for companies that wish to export. A free and fair trade is of central importance and a central driving force for economic progress, and this for all concerned. This is why it was a great success of the G20 to very clearly say that we are against protectionist measures. That, at least, we were able to do during the global financial crisis. But unfortunately, as the global financial crisis recedes sort of in the memory of people into the background, there is an increasing tendency to resort to protectionist measures. And we also see that the gains in prosperity benefit some more, some less, and some don't benefit at all. This is why we are called upon to reorient our economic, trade and financial policy more on inclusive growth. What this means, we've seen when we looked at Africa. economically weaker countries have to be integrated into the international division of labor. We have to open up market access to them and give them more incentive on the ground and give them the possibility to give more incentive to become engaged as entrepreneurs. A better integration into the global economy can actually do a lot of good, as we were able to see when we were able to reach the Millennium Development Goal dating back to 2000, namely to halve extreme poverty by 2015. We were able to do this, and that is obviously due to the economic upswing in Asia. But that, again, has shifted the global economic balance of powers. China is one example of this. If we look at the impressive economic growth of this country, we also have to say its international responsibility has grown. Whether such a great economy as China is actually abiding by the rules of the global economy, obviously it will be of crucial importance for the economic development all over the world. It will always be essential, and this is not something that only refers to China, to make it very clear that respecting rules is in the global interest, but also in one's own vested interest, be it the removal or drawdown of barriers to trade and investment, be it treating national and foreign enterprises on one's own market the same, or respecting standards, protection standards for the environment, workers and consumers. Globalization is happening in the world today, and it affects us all. So we have to come up with a convincing answer whether we want to allow it to drive us forward or whether we are able and willing to shape it economically, socially, environmentally, and in the humanitarian field. Germany has benefited in an extraordinary way from globalization, but we have no guarantee that this will continue in the future, and certainly no claim to this. It is all the more important that we try to persuade others to follow this approach of openness together with our partners. And that is why the European Union is so valuable. If we Europeans speak with one voice, then this voice will be heard more in the world than if it were only one individual country that were to raise its voice. We Europeans in the foreign development and defense political field, and also in our economic policy, need to work closer together. Once we do this, we can be more credible, more convincing when we stand up for fair and free trade, and also more effective, and when we say new perspectives for people have to be opened up for those who so far haven't had this and therefore had to leave their homes. Ladies and gentlemen, there is certainly no lack of global challenges, but there is also no lack of good ideas how we can solve them. And this is something that we can clearly see here in this forum, the T20 Global Solutions Summit. So I'm very much looking forward to my discussion with you. I'm more than ready to answer your questions. I wish you a successful meeting, and I would like to bid a very warm welcome to participants from Argentina, because we're very much looking forward to very soon be your guests in Argentina. And I know from my talks with President Macri that he feels very much committed to globalization and shaping globalization in the sense that I've just outlined.